Long before curious travelers ever caught sight of it on a winding road in the Berkshires, the legend of a Vanderbilt summer cottage known as Elm Court swept through high society. Whispers of 106 rooms, sweeping gardens, and glittering parties made it sound more like a palace than a casual holiday retreat. One might expect nothing less from the union of Emily Thorne Vanderbilt and her equally prosperous husband, William Douglas Sloane. Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are uncovering what happened to this forgotten Vanderbilt estate. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. Emily's story began on Staten Island in 1852 when she was born the fifth child of William Henry Vanderbilt. She was thus a granddaughter of Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt, the force behind the New York Central Railroad Empire and one of the richest men in the world at the time. From a young age, she saw her family's fortune and standing grow at a nearly unimaginable speed. Her father, William Henry, inherited the Commodore's talents for investment and expansion, ultimately amassing an even larger fortune during his lifetime, an accomplishment that seemed impossible for anyone other than a Vanderbilt. Yet for Emily, life was not merely about enjoying vast sums of money. Her penchant for philanthropy ran deep, inspiring her to channel Vanderbilt resources into causes she cared about. She played a major role in founding the Sloan Hospital for Women by contributing over $1 million, an eye-popping figure back in the late 1800s when the average American earned only a fraction of that across a lifetime. Still, Emily was not the only luminary in this story. She married William Douglas Sloane in 1872, a man who knew a thing or two about wealth and status in his own right. William's father emigrated from Scotland and founded a high-end carpet and furniture firm that soon became legendary for outfitting grand houses up and down the East Coast. Known as W&J Sloane, this company catered to families like the Vanderbilts, Astors, and Morgans, offering both exquisite design services and lavish home goods. The Sloane name was so prestigious that certain rooms in Manhattan's grandest mansions simply would not be considered finished unless they featured an elegant Sloane rug or a piece of furniture. William himself had started working at the family firm in his mid-teens, learning every facet of the business. By the time he met Emily, he was a well-traveled businessman with deep pockets and deep connections, a perfect match for the strong-willed Vanderbilt heiress. The newlyweds occupied part of the now famous Vanderbilt Triple Palace on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, an address that symbolized the highest tiers of wealth in Gilded Age New York. But as the city's scorching summers arrived each year, the prospect of a serene, rural haven grew irresistible. Some in Emily's extended family escaped to Newport, Rhode Island. Others commissioned mountain retreats in North Carolina or upstate New York. William and Emily, however, gravitated toward the Berkshires in western Massachusetts. By the mid-1880s, that region was emerging as a fashionable sanctuary, especially for New Yorkers whose lives were otherwise governed by the relentless hum of business and society events. Anyone who heard about William and Emily's plans to build a summer house in Lenox, Massachusetts might have pictured a modest cottage or a pastoral farmhouse, but that would be entirely the wrong image. In 1885, they commissioned the renowned architectural firm Peabody & Stearns to design what was originally intended to be a shingle-style residence, relatively understated by Vanderbilt standards but still ambitious enough to astonish onlookers. Emily and William wanted an inviting place for children, guests, and staff, somewhere well-designed but comfortable for a rotating cast of friends and extended family. If at first this summer home seemed like a refined getaway, it quickly ballooned in scope thanks to expansions requested by its owners. By the turn of the 20th century, it became one of the largest houses in the region, a layout of hallways and corridors so vast that new visitors risked turning a corner and forgetting how to find the front door. Emily and William had no shortage of advantages in shaping the dream estate. While other wealthy couples might simply hand over design decisions to an architect, they were personally acquainted with top creative minds. They had the prestige and cash to hire Frederick Law Olmsted, the visionary behind Central Park, to design the property's gardens and landscaping. In those days, a Gilded Age country house wasn't complete without an enchanting outdoor stage for lavish tea parties, weekend-long tennis matches, and quiet strolls among formal gardens. Olmsted and his firm laid out curving pathways, flower beds, a reflecting pond with a pergola, and shade trees that framed distant mountain views in all directions. When the family gathered there each summer, the mansion's interiors hummed with activity. Elaborate dinners typically featured 5, 6, or 7 courses, with footmen gliding in and out of a dining room crowned by an ornate plaster ceiling. Housemaids tended to bedrooms, fluffing pillows and replacing linens with a diligence that to modern eyes might look like a staff for a boutique hotel rather than a single family. The sumptuous living could have come off as severe or intimidating, but friends often remarked on how the place blended opulence with warmth, a slight but meaningful contrast to some of the sterner Vanderbilt residences elsewhere. After the turn of the century, the house assumed a new kind of importance beyond weekend gatherings and horse-drawn carriage rides around the estate. With World War I raging in Europe, America's biggest families did not stay untouched by global affairs. Emily's circle included notable statesmen and diplomats, and in 1919, an influential group of them convened at the Berkshire home for a series of private discussions now remembered as the Elm Court Talks. These behind-the-scenes gatherings fed into ongoing negotiations for the Treaty of Versailles and helped shape the creation of the League of Nations. It's astonishing to think that a place built for frolicking and manicured gardens contributed, even in a small way, to the course of 20th century politics. Such a storied property was naturally shaped by the personal journeys of its owners. William Douglas Sloane passed away in 1915, and Emily married Henry White, a respected diplomat, 5 years later. The new couple continued to use the home as a social and political hub, and Henry's connections only increased its reputation for attracting decision-makers. But eventually, the era that had created houses like this began to wane. The last gasp of Gilded Age opulence was already fading by the 1930s and 1940s, and Emily herself passed away in 1946 at the remarkable age of 94, right on the grounds of the beloved estate she had nurtured for decades. With Emily gone, the responsibility of deciding the future of this colossal estate fell to her descendants. Many of the Berkshires' cottages were being sold off to hotels, schools, or philanthropic organizations. Some were demolished or left to decay, but Emily's family chose to open the place as an inn in 1948, calling it the Elm Court Club. For about a decade, guests dined in elegance and danced on Saturday nights, an experience that must have felt like stepping back into the grandest aspects of the Gilded Age. Few realized that these lavish weekends were in part an effort to keep the doors open and the property preserved. Ultimately, even that plan proved unsustainable and the inn closed, leaving the home vacant for several decades. During that silent intermission, vandals and treasure hunters peeled off architectural details, smashed windows, and left behind a chaos of broken plaster. Much of the original furniture and art went missing, some stolen outright, and some sold off by relatives who no longer saw use for a 106-room behemoth in the country. By the close of the 20th century, the once shimmering estate was all but forgotten, its gardens overgrown and its hallways echoing with emptiness. Local kids dared one another to sneak inside. Urban explorers told stories of hidden vaults or leftover family gems in the walls. And yet through all that time, through break-ins, rumors, and the creeping hush of neglect, its core structure held firm, carrying the weight of family lore and historical importance. Eventually, the home re-emerged to the public awareness when Emily Vanderbilt and William Sloane's descendants made a decision to rescue and renovate it. Renovation, however, was more difficult than anyone expected. Rotten beams, fraying wires, and absent architectural pieces posed huge challenges. Still, certain treasures remained, including sections of plaster ceilings and at least a few original fireplaces that survived decades of disrespect. Gradually, a careful restoration began, driven by a mix of nostalgia, local pride, and the hope that someday the stately vestige of the Gilded Age could find a sustainable new purpose. Some of that hope materialized in the early 2000s when part of the mansion was reopened to guests. Old pictures show portions of the home now gleaming with new paint, rewired for electricity, and fitted with modern plumbing, though other wings stayed locked up, awaiting the next stage of restoration. Meanwhile, developers and potential buyers came and went. Some with big plans for luxury resorts or private enclaves, but the transition seldom stuck. That slow back-and-forth period ended when a new owner with a determined vision arrived on the scene. As it happens, despite the talk of rumored demolitions and unstoppable decay, the mansion was indeed still standing. It had persevered long enough to attract a real estate investor who ultimately purchased the property with the intention of completing the restoration. The descendants of Emily and William can rest easy knowing that their ancestral summer hideaway, fabled for its scale, its Olmsted gardens, and the hush of its wooden backdrop, still captivates those who lay eyes on it. After escaping total abandonment and the wrecking ball, the mansion has stepped back into the limelight, ready for the next 100 years of stories. And so, in a beautiful twist of historical fortune, what began as a Gilded Age cottage for two wealthy newlyweds remains a living monument of American ambition, extravagance, and reinvention, promising that its greatest moments may yet be ahead. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What did you think about Elm Court? Let me know down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.